I opened my budget file one quiet night and felt something shift inside my chest. The numbers lined up like small confessions I had ignored for years. Every dinner, every bill, every quiet expectation pointed back to me without mercy. Frank boasted online about providing for me, while my card carried every charge. My mother smiled through every meal, pretending not to notice the waiter handing me the check. Bate laughed, carefree, already assuming I would cover whatever she forgot or wanted. The room felt colder as I scrolled, watching the totals grow heavier with each line. I realized the truth had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for me to finally look. This wasn't generosity or family tradition. It was dependence disguised as love. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I simply stopped paying. I grew up in a house where fairness was spoken about often, but rarely practiced. Bate always received the softer version of every rule, while mine came sharpened. If she wanted a new dress, it appeared within days as if by magic. If I needed a book for school, I was told to wait or find a used copy. My mother said Bate was sensitive, a word that excused every whim she had. I was labeled independent, which really meant I should not ask for anything. Frank reinforced it with jokes that never felt like jokes to me. He called Bate the princess and called me the accountant of the house. He laughed each time he said it, but the message underneath never changed. I learned early that approval came easier when I stayed quiet and grateful. As a child, I tried to ignore the imbalance because I thought all families were like this. When birthdays arrived, Bate's gifts filled the living room like a small celebration. Mine fit neatly into a single bag, often with a receipt still inside. I told myself it didn't matter. That effort mattered more than objects. But even effort seemed to count only when it came from me. I cleaned up the kitchen while Bate took pictures in her room. I helped with chores while she practiced cheer routines in the hallway. My mother said Bate needed to focus on her future, and I would be fine. Fine became the expectation, not a choice or a possibility. In school, I pushed myself harder than anyone expected because it was the only space I controlled. I stayed late in classrooms and libraries, chasing every opportunity I could earn. When I told my family I wanted to apply to MIT, they looked surprised. Not proud, surprised, as if I had asked for something unreasonable. Bate announced her dream school was USC, and the house exploded with excitement. Suddenly there were tours planned, budgets discussed, and a fund created for her tuition. When I asked about support for my applications, the room fell quiet. Frank said I was smart enough to figure it out myself, as if that were a compliment. I applied anyway, filling every form alone late at night. When the acceptance letter arrived, I held it like proof that my work had meaning. My mother smiled and said she was proud, but her eyes drifted toward Bate. Bate complained that my news overshadowed her dance competition that weekend. Frank suggested I consider a cheaper school to ease the pressure on everyone. I nodded, even though the pressure was never theirs to carry. To afford MIT, I worked 2 part-time jobs and applied for every scholarship available. I stretched meals, saved tips, and studied between shifts. No one asked how I was doing or if I needed help. But when Bate needed new gear, a fundraiser appeared instantly with full support. The scholarship committee later told me my aid was reduced due to family income reports. Those reports were not mine, and I had never seen them. I realized then that the imbalance wasn't accidental, but built into the structure of our home. Every step forward I earned, but every step Bate took was carried for her. I thought leaving for college would free me from that old gravity. I didn't know then that it was only the beginning of another kind of weight. After graduation, I thought adulthood would finally give me distance from the old patterns. But habits formed in childhood have a way of finding you again. The first time my family asked for help, it sounded reasonable enough. Bate needed a temporary loan for her textbooks, and I wanted to be generous. I transferred the money without thinking twice because she promised to repay it soon. Weeks passed, then months, and the repayment never came. When I brought it up, Beth laughed lightly and said she thought it was a gift. My mother chimed in, saying I was doing well and shouldn't worry about small amounts. I realized then that my income had quietly become their safety net. Frank joined the pattern with practiced ease, using concern as his disguise. He called to ask how work was going, then slipped in questions about my salary. Before long, he forgot his wallet during dinners, and I covered the bills out of habit. He told the waiters I insisted on paying, turning my discomfort into a performance. Social media became his stage, where he posted photos of meals I funded. He wrote captions about family bonding, while my bank account carried the weight. I tried to convince myself it was temporary, just a phase of transition. But every month, new expenses appeared with my name attached. Beth claimed she needed help with rent because her roommate moved out unexpectedly. She insisted it was only for 2 months, then quietly extended it to 6. When she missed a tuition payment, the university emailed the primary contact. That contact was me, though I had never signed anything for her school. I paid the overdue amount because the late fee terrified her, or so she said. Later, I found out she had spent most of her funds on a spring break trip. My mother defended her, saying, "She's young," while implying I should be grateful I could help. Frank added that my success meant I had responsibilities beyond myself. He made it sound noble, but it felt like a trap disguised as praise. I tried setting boundaries, but every no was treated as a personal attack. Beth cried the first time I refused to pay for her new laptop. She said I didn't care about her dreams and walked out of the room. My mother followed me, asking why I was being cold and uncharacteristic. The irony was painful, because generosity had never been my choice to begin with. Work became my only refuge, a place where effort had clear results. But even there, the pressure of supporting 3 adults shadowed every decision. I kept track of everything in a quiet Excel sheet. Hopping the numbers would keep me grounded. Each row represented a favor, a bill, or a promise I knew would never be repaid. By year 3, the total felt unreal, as if I were documenting someone else's life. My friends asked why I was always stressed, but I never knew how to explain it. How do you describe a burden that was handed to you long before you understood its weight? I believed I could manage it if I just worked harder, earned more, stayed patient. But the more I gave, the more they expected, until expectation became entitlement. I did not realize then that I was no longer supporting a family. I was funding a lifestyle that none of them planned to give up. One night, I decided to gather every piece of paper, every receipt, every statement I had. I wanted to see the full picture of what I had been carrying for years. As I organized the documents, a pattern emerged that made my stomach turn. Beth had applied for scholarships, but they were denied due to false information submitted by my family. My name appeared on rental agreements I had never signed knowingly. I discovered Frank had posted online, claiming he had fully supported me through college. He shared photos of dinners I had paid for, describing them as his generosity. Every claim painted a false story, making me invisible in my own life. Even tax filings were manipulated, using my identity to reduce the family's liability. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could they treat me as a tool and expect me to remain silent? I created a digital folder and named it Exit File, a record of every injustice. Inside, I stored PDFs of bills, copies of rental contracts, screenshots of social media posts. I added bank statements showing payments I had made on behalf of Beth and Frank. I included emails and text messages where lies and manipulation were evident. I even documented times when their actions had legal consequences I could be blamed for. Each file was a silent scream I had held back for years. I realized that this wasn't just financial abuse. It was a systematic erasure of my autonomy. Every dinner, every favor, every unpaid bill had been a brick in the wall separating me from freedom. The more I compiled, the clearer it became. I had evidence of deliberate deception. I had proof that my sacrifices were taken for granted and claimed as theirs. Bate had never intended to repay anything. Frank had never wanted to acknowledge my contribution. My mother had been complicit, using guilt as a leash. I documented the emails from the university about missed scholarships and the manipulated income statements. I saved screenshots of contracts where my signature had been misused. I even included notes to myself, scribbled over years, tracking what I had spent and what I had been promised. By the time I finished, exit file was massive, overwhelming even me. But it was mine, a record I controlled, proof I could no longer be ignored. I named each folder carefully: financial lies, legal risks, social manipulation. I wanted clarity for the day I would confront them, if that day ever came. This was no longer about forgiving or forgetting. It was about creating a barrier I could stand behind. I realized that I had been fighting a battle invisible to the world. No one saw the toll, the stress, the quiet erosion of my independence. Exit file became my shield, my declaration of intent. It was the first step in taking back what they had stolen. I was preparing to reclaim not just money, but respect, dignity, and control over my own life. For the first time, I felt a measure of power I hadn't known I could claim. I closed the folder and breathed, knowing the next steps would be the hardest, yet most necessary. Bate announced her engagement with a wide smile and no hint of doubt. The house buzzed with excitement, but I felt a familiar weight settle on my shoulders. Before any plans were made, my mother assumed I would pay for most of it. I listened as they discussed venues, flowers, and catering, each item silently marked with my name. Frank bragged about helping with arrangements, while I silently counted the cost in my head. The rehearsal dinner, the fancy invitations, the bridal party gifts, all expected from me. Bate insisted the dress was non-negotiable, and the cost would be fine. It was clear no one had budgeted or thought beyond their own desires. Every conversation was a reminder. I had been cast as the family's perpetual benefactor. Frank took credit for ideas I had subtly suggested, painting them as his own creativity. The vendors listed prices, and I calculated silently how much I would end up paying. I felt a familiar knot in my stomach tighten with each passing detail. The florist quoted a price for bouquets, and I already knew I would foot the bill. Bate laughed and said I could surprise everyone with my generosity. I realized this was not celebration. It was expectation dressed as joy. The caterer mentioned a tasting event, and I immediately calculated travel and food costs. Every choice Bate made assumed I had an unlimited account and a limitless tolerance. Frank joked about how he had everything under control, while my name stayed unspoken. My mother clapped and smiled as if this plan were perfectly fair. I could feel my patience fraying, but I stayed quiet for the moment. The seating arrangements, the music, even the photographer's fees, my responsibility. They spoke about their dream wedding, while I counted how far my finances could stretch. I realized the engagement was a trigger, a spark for years of hidden resentment to flare. I wanted to speak up, but feared the immediate backlash and guilt trips. Instead, I logged every planned expense into my personal ledger, noting every expectation. The rehearsal dinner alone would cost more than some of my monthly budgets combined. Bates' friends assumed I was excited, but they didn't see the invisible tally building behind my smile. Frank planned to toast the couple, yet none of his words would acknowledge my contributions. Every table setting, every gift, every rented chair became a symbol of what I had carried silently. The total began to feel like a mountain I had been climbing alone. Even as I prepared for confrontation, I realized I needed to remain strategic. I could not allow emotion to dictate my response this time. I reviewed exit file in my mind, noting the proof I had compiled for every misuse of my funds. I knew the time was coming when the ledger of debts and lies would no longer be ignored. Bates' excitement made the tension between us invisible to everyone else. I decided to let the planning continue while I prepared the moment I would reclaim my boundaries. Every expectation became a reminder that my generosity had been exploited for years. I felt a quiet determination building with each passing day. The engagement was supposed to be a celebration, but I saw it as the tipping point. I would no longer fund their fantasy at the cost of my freedom. This wedding was the final test of my resolve, and I knew I could not falter. For the first time, I began imagining a day when their plans could crumble without my money. The thought was terrifying, yet it sparked a sense of clarity I had never felt before. I closed my ledger and exhaled, readying myself for the confrontation that would change everything. The day arrived when the venue payment was due, and the pressure hit me instantly. Bate called, pleading as if I had a choice but to cover the entire amount. Frank added his voice, reminding me how important it was for the family image. I listened, silent, feeling the weight of years of unpaid acknowledgement. I opened my laptop and joined the video call, my heart steady despite their tone. I had exit file ready, every number, every receipt, every manipulated document. I spoke slowly, deliberately, so each word landed with clarity. I started with the totals, showing 6 years of payments I had made. Every dinner, every rent, every tuition and bill was accounted for. The final number flashed on the screen, $67,483. I watched their expressions shift from expectation to shock and disbelief. I explained that from this moment, I would no longer provide financial support. I told them I was removing my name from rental agreements and shared contracts. I detailed instances of fraud, lies, and misrepresentation I had uncovered. Bate gasped, claiming I was overreacting and exaggerating the amounts. Frank's jaw tightened, but he could not dispute the documentation before him. My mother's eyes filled with tears, a mix of guilt and anger, but I remained calm. I told them the repeated misrepresentation had consequences, including potential legal action. I emphasized that my decision was final and non-negotiable. No amount of crying, begging, or guilt would change the outcome. Bate accused me of ruining her wedding dreams, but I only shook my head. I reminded her that the dreams had been built on my unpaid labor and money. I shared that the moment I stopped funding, their carefully constructed plans would face reality. Frank threatened, but I calmly noted the evidence I had for reporting his claims. The video call became a confrontation of truth versus entitlement. Every excuse they offered fell apart against the facts I presented. I could see Bate realizing that her expectations had been built entirely on my sacrifices. My mother tried to appeal to my heart, but I had learned this was not about emotion. I showed screenshots of social media posts, contracts, and financial statements. I explained that the exit file was not punishment, it was protection of my autonomy. Every question they asked was met with precise answers supported by evidence. I ended the call by restating my boundaries firmly and clearly. I would not pay for the wedding, the debts, or any future indulgences. I logged off, feeling a mix of relief and tension. The room on the other side of the screen was silent, stunned by the reality I revealed. No one knew how much power I had been quietly holding in the shadows. For the first time, I felt control over my life and finances. Their anger and shock confirmed what I had long suspected. The dependency they cultivated on me had left them unprepared for resistance. I had drawn a line, and no one could erase it. I knew this confrontation would change everything for us, permanently. For the first time in years, I felt free to reclaim the life I had built for myself. Exit file had served its purpose: proof, clarity, and a foundation for independence. I closed my laptop, knowing the battle was not over, but the power had shifted. This was my awakening, the day I truly chose myself over their expectations. Without my support, the wedding plans began to collapse immediately. Vendors called, asking for payment that no one else could provide. The florist canceled the order, stating they could not proceed without funds. The caterer demanded upfront payment, leaving the menu unfinished. The venue called repeatedly, frustrated and confused by the missing deposit. Beth panicked, realizing the reality of the costs she had assumed I would cover. Frank tried to salvage the situation, but his words had no power without money. My mother pleaded, begging me to reconsider, but I held firm. Guests began noticing changes, the excitement turning to awkward questions. Invitations went out, but details were incomplete, causing confusion and frustration. The photographer postponed the sessions, stating they could not work without contracts paid. The rehearsal dinner was canceled, leaving Beth and her friends disappointed. The decorations never arrived, tables remained bare, flowers unsent. Beth's dress had been ordered, but alterations were halted due to unpaid fees. The band called to confirm payment, then canceled the performance after no response. The timeline they imagined started unraveling in front of everyone's eyes. Family friends whispered about the chaos, unsure who to blame. Beth accused me of sabotaging her wedding, her voice rising with desperation. I reminded her gently that I had only stopped paying for what had never been mine to fund. Frank raged, claiming this was unfair, but the evidence I shared on the call remained unchallenged. The house was filled with tension, the air heavy with unspoken blame. Every expectation built on my generosity had dissolved instantly. I watched them scramble, powerless without the financial cushion I had provided. Beth tried to negotiate, offering small contributions she could barely afford. Frank attempted to take over, but vendors refused to work without full payment. The elegant vision of the wedding melted into confusion and unfinished arrangements. I saw the realization in their eyes. They had relied entirely on me. No one had planned for independence or responsibility. The lavish party they envisioned was now just chaos and empty promises. I packed a small bag, feeling a strange sense of liberation amid their panic. Ethan waited for me outside, and we left together, leaving the disaster behind. The streets felt quiet compared to the storm I had walked away from. For the first time, I did not owe anyone anything beyond myself. Beth cried behind us, unable to understand how her dreams depended on my money. Frank shouted, but his threats felt empty now that I had withdrawn support. My mother followed silently, her words exhausted by guilt and helplessness. I realized the wedding's collapse was not my doing, but the natural consequence of their reliance. Years of exploitation had built a fragile structure that could not stand alone. Every unpaid invoice and expectation now reflected their own choices. I finally felt the weight of their demands lift from my shoulders. The chaos of the wedding was a sign of their unpreparedness, not my failure. As we walked away, I understood I had created space for my freedom. The money I had spent, the energy I had given, had been mine to control. I no longer carried the burden of their entitlement. The wedding's collapse marked a turning point, a liberation I had waited for. Every step away from that house felt like reclaiming pieces of my life. I was finally free to make decisions that benefited only me. No guilt, no obligation, just clarity and the first taste of real independence. For the first time, I could imagine a future without their manipulation. The collapse behind me was a necessary chaos for the life I was about to build. A message arrived from the server who had worked the wedding events. She confirmed quietly that everyone knew who had really paid for everything. It wasn't me who ruined the celebration, only my decision to stop funding it. Beth's disappointment and Frank's anger were consequences of their own reliance. I finally understood the truth. Their collapse was built on entitlement, not my choices. For the first time, I felt the freedom to make decisions solely for myself. I could spend, save, or invest without guilt or expectation from anyone else. The weight of 6 years of unnoticed labor lifted off my shoulders entirely. I walked forward with clarity, leaving resentment and obligation behind. Ethan smiled beside me, witnessing the quiet victory of autonomy. Money no longer dictated my relationships or my happiness. I was in control of my life, my finances, and my choices. The past could not hold me hostage any longer. I finally recognized my own value and the power of saying no. Their world had crumbled because it depended on me, not because I acted unjustly. I embraced the calm of independence, feeling lighter than I had in years. No more compromise at the cost of my own well-being. Every decision I made from now on belonged to me and me alone. Freedom, clarity, and self-respect were my inheritance. The story ended not with destruction, but with a quiet triumph of choice.